Hey guys, what's going on? Mr. Hammond here, talking today a little bit about the Korean War, right? Just a little introduction to it, make sure we're on the same page, and this is what we'll be doing for the next couple of weeks. New unit, woo! So, Korean War fought between South Korea and North Korea, hence the name Korean War. It is the first major conflict of the Cold War as the Soviet Union supported North Korea, the United States supported South Korea. Why did they support each of those sides? Well, I'll tell you, because the South Koreans, right, they were capitalists, so the United States liked them. North Koreans, they were communists, so the Soviet Union liked them. There's reasons for that, all right? Don't worry too much about the dates, the leaders, not super important. But yeah, from 1950 to 1953, the war happened. Just know that it was the first proxy war of the Cold War. All right, even though a lot of people forget about it, most people think Vietnam when they think of proxy wars during the Cold War. So we got over here this nice little map. See if we can get that a little bigger. North Korea up here, right? And then we have South Korea down here. North Korea, South Korea. Capital of North Korea is Pyongyang. Capital of South Korea is Seoul. And to the north of North Korea is China. And then over here is the Soviet Union, USSR. Down here we have Japan. Now that's not super important right now, but it's going to come up later on. So, you'll be glad I showed you right now. Before the war, the Korean Peninsula had been a part of Japan. After the war, it needed to be divided up. Obviously, Japan lost World War II pretty mightily, right? Got 2 atomic bombs dropped on them. The northern half of the peninsula went under control of the Soviet Union. The southern half went to the United States. That's why North Korea became communist, because they were under the control of the Soviet Union after World War II ended. And the southern half became capitalist because they were under the control of the United States after World War II ended. The two sides were divided, right, at the 38th parallel. 38th parallel. That's going to be important. Okay. Eventually, two separate states formed, with North Korea forming a communist government. South Korea is capitalist, again, because of, who was controlling who afterwards. This left a lot of tension because obviously communism and capitalism are two ideas that don't really get along with each other. And so on June 25th, 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea. Now, they assumed that they would have the help of the Soviet Union. They actually were very successful in their initial invasion. They pushed the South Korean army way, way back. And the United Nations, mostly the United States, came to help out. Because soon the South Korean government only occupied a very small part of the Korean Peninsula on the southern tip. They were pushing all the way towards Japan. Okay? Yeah, that's not super important. Don't worry about that. Battle of Minchon, not super important. What is important, though, is as the South Koreans start to lose, the situation becomes more desperate, the United States steps up. Partly because of the Truman Doctrine, right? President Truman wanted to go on the defensive. He wanted to defend all of these countries that were under the threat of communism, that were actively resisting communism, right, as a part of the broader containment strategy. But beyond that, Truman was very worried about Japan falling to communism through something called the domino theory, right? Domino theory states that if one country falls to communism, all its neighboring countries are going to fall to communism. If we go back up here to the map, you can see again, look how close Japan is to South Korea. There's just this little bit of water here separating Japan and South Korea. And right after World War II, Japan became a very good trading partner with the United States. We were making a lot of money trading back and forth with Japan. Okay, so we didn't care too much about South Korea falling to communism, but the idea of the day was that if South Korea fell to communism, Japan would be next. So we saved South Korea, or tried to save South Korea, so that we could save our trading partner in Japan, right? Hopefully everyone sees how that works out. Okay, so we jump in, we start pushing everyone back. This is when China entered the war here, all right? After the United States helps out South Korea, we actually turn the tide around. We start pushing them back, and then we push them all the way up to the border of North Korea, right? Push the North Koreans all the way to the northern border. This is the same thing as the southern border of China. So again, the map here, you guys can see, right? So North Korea push. They pushed everyone down to about here. This is all that South Korea had left, right? But then the United States comes in, and we push them back. past this line, the 38th parallel, and to the southern border of China, at which point China, realizing that the United States is on its southern border, goes, oh, heck no, right? And they start pushing back this way, and eventually it kind of settles really where it started. Like I said, not a whole lot of territory changing hands during the Korean War. So North Korea pushes, U.S. and South Korea push back, China pushes back, and we ended up right back here at this line. Right? That's just kind of how it goes. So, end of the war. Here, negotiations continued for much of the war, but Truman didn't want to appear weak. Eisenhower offers some concessions and ends the war once he becomes president. Again, don't worry too much about the names. Just know that, there was a lot of negotiating, and technically a peace treaty was never signed. This is a big inaccuracy of this website here. Actually, the only problem I see with it, they talk about how there was a treaty signed right here, July 17th, 1953. A treaty was signed at the end of the war. This is an armistice. Technically, the war never ended because a peace treaty was never signed. So, I mean, if you want to get literal about it, the Korean War is still going on. It ended in 1953. The fighting ended, but the Korean War is still going on because there was never an official peace treaty between the two nations, right? But they've remained independent. The borders remain at the 30th parallel. And now there is a 2-mile demilitarized zone. Hopefully we remember that. Or we will learn about that word here in a couple of days, I guess. The demilitarized zone got set up shortly after the Korean War ended as sort of a buffer between the communist North Koreans and the capitalist South Koreans. A couple of fun facts about the Korean War. Here's an interesting picture. This is actually a monument in D.C., which isn't too far from us, of the Korean War, despite the fact that, again, they call it the Forgotten War. Although Korea was not strategic to the U.S., they entered the war because they did not want to appear soft on communism. The U.S. also wanted to protect Japan, which they did consider strategic. Why did they consider Japan strategic? Because it was a great trade partner for us. Right? Also, they had a lot of nice little warm water ports we could use for naval bases and such. Situation today in Korea is pretty similar to what it was 50 plus years ago. Casualties, right here. Here we go. It is estimated that around 2.5 million people were killed or wounded during the war, around 40,000 U.S. soldiers, right? The civilian casualties were especially high, with estimates of around 2 million civilians killed. Civilians, if for those of you that don't remember, are the innocent people who aren't military personnel. So a lot of people getting killed in this conflict for ultimately virtually no exchange of territory, just the Soviet Union and the United States kind of engaging in this proxy war where they're both supporting one side or the other, trying to make sure that capitalism doesn't spread from South Korea to North Korea and vice versa, that communism doesn't spread from North Korea to South Korea. And that is essentially the Korean War, all summed up there.